For the last 5 years, my world was confined to the four walls of my mother's house. My calendar wasn't marked with deadlines or vacations, but with medication schedules and doctor's appointments. My brother Kevin, living 3 states away with his perfect family, called it my gap year. My sister Megan, busy with her high-powered career in the city, called my sacrifice a sweet but impractical choice. They sent fruit baskets on holidays and called for 10 minutes every other Sunday. I was the one who held my mother's hand through every fever, every fear, and every final breath. Now, the house is quiet for the first time in years. And of course, they are finally here. Kevin spent the morning on the phone in the driveway, closing a deal. Megan walked through the house with a critical eye, mentally tagging the antiques she plans to take. They think the reading of the will tomorrow is just a formality, a simple 3-way split of the assets before they can gently push me out into the real world they never left. They look at me with pity, the daughter who put her life on pause. They have no idea Mom's last will and testament wasn't just a document. It was her final verdict, and I'm the only one who already knows the outcome. Of course, this quiet is deceptive. For 5 years, this house was a symphony of managed chaos. The beep of the heart monitor, the rattle of a pill bottle, the daytime TV shows that became the soundtrack to our lives. The decision for me to become the conductor of that symphony was made during a conference call. I remember it perfectly. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same one I'm at now. My brother Kevin, from his corner office, explained that uprooting his kids was simply out of the question. My sister Megan, between meetings, stated that her career was at a critical junction, and taking time off would be professional suicide. Their reasons were presented as unbreakable laws of physics. Then, the silence on the line and all eyes, psychic or otherwise, turned to me. The single one. The one with the flexible graphic design job. "It just makes the most sense for you to be there, Sarah," Kevin had said, his voice laced with the false sincerity of a man closing a deal he knows is one-sided. Megan promised to fly in once a month. Kevin promised to cover any expenses. Their promises evaporated within the first 6 months. Megan's visits became quarterly, then just for holidays. Kevin's financial support became a check at Christmas with "for Mom" written in the memo line, as if I were a contractor to be reimbursed. But the moment that truly defined it all was last Thanksgiving. I had spent 2 days cooking. I pureed a special portion of every dish so Mom could eat with us. I managed to get her dressed and sitting at the head of the table, a small triumph that left me exhausted. Kevin and Megan breezed in 2 hours late, holding a store-bought pumpkin pie. And my mother, in a rare moment of lucidity, her eyes clouded with dementia, but her old instincts sharp as ever, lit up. "Oh, Kevin, you look so handsome," she'd said. "Megan, tell me all about your big important job." They sat with her for 20 minutes, checking their phones before retreating to the living room to talk about their own lives. I was the one who held the fork to Mom's lips. I was the one who cleaned her when she choked. But their mere presence was the miracle. I was just the furniture. I loved my mother. I truly did. But she had spent her whole life gazing at her 2 brightest stars, never noticing the one who was holding the telescope steady. It wasn't until the very end, in the final quiet days, when the others had said their brief, tearful goodbyes and flown back to their real lives, that she saw me. Her eyes cleared for just a moment. She gripped my hand and whispered, "You were the only one. It should all go to the only one." I thought it was just the morphine talking, but she squeezed my hand again, a surprising strength in her grip. She knew, and tomorrow, Kevin and Megan will finally know it too. We met the next morning in the suffocatingly quiet office of Mr. Gable, my mother's estate lawyer. The room smelled of old paper and stale coffee. My siblings, Kevin and Megan, sat stiffly in their leather chairs, looking every bit the important, busy people they were. They kept checking their phones, treating the solemn occasion as one last inconvenient appointment to be checked off. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of the last 5 years and the profound finality of the moment. Mr. Gable, a kind man with weary eyes who had known our family for decades, cleared his throat. "Before we begin," he said, looking over his spectacles at Kevin and Megan, "I want to state for the record that I met with your mother several times in her final months. She was of sound mind and exceptionally clear about her wishes." He opened the large envelope. The will began predictably. To Kevin, Mom left her father's antique watch. So you remember that time is the most precious thing we have. To Megan, she left her diamond earrings. So you always shine brightly. My siblings exchanged a small, satisfied smile. They thought this was just the sentimental prelude to the main event. Then Mr. Gable took a deep breath. Regarding the primary assets of the estate, he continued, his voice steady, including the house at 245 Oak Street, all savings and investment accounts, and the remainder of all personal property, your mother's will is as follows. I bequeath everything in its entirety to my daughter, Sarah. The silence that followed was deafening. Megan let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. Kevin leaned forward, his face turning red. That's a mistake. Read it again. There's no mistake, Mr. Gable said calmly. Your mother also insisted I include a personal addendum. She wanted her reasoning to be perfectly understood. He adjusted his glasses and read from a separate, handwritten-looking note that had been notarized and attached. My children were all given the same love, but only one of them gave it back in my time of greatest need. Kevin and Megan built their own lives, and I am proud of them. But Sarah was the one who held my life together. She sacrificed her youth, while they sent fruit baskets. Family is more than blood. It is about showing up. Sarah showed up. This inheritance is not a handout. It is a payment for a debt of love and time that I could never fully repay. It is justice. The room erupted. Accusations of manipulation and undue influence flew from their mouths, aimed at me. But for the first time in my life, their words had no power. I didn't have to defend myself. My mother, in her last and most powerful act, had already done it for me. I stood up, thanked Mr. Gable, and walked out of the office, leaving them to argue with a ghost. The power wasn't just in the money. It was in that final, beautiful, undeniable word, justice. I expected the storm, but I didn't expect it to break so quickly. I spent the afternoon after the will reading just walking through the rooms of my new house, touching the furniture, feeling the profound shift in the silence. It was no longer the silence of waiting. It was the silence of ownership. The peace lasted exactly 4 hours. Megan was the first to strike. She tried a flanking maneuver, cloaked in false concern. "Sarah, honey," she cooed over the phone, her voice dripping with a sweetness she hadn't used with me in years. "I'm just calling to see how you're holding up. I know you're exhausted and grieving. You're not thinking straight." I didn't say anything, so she continued. "We all know Mom wasn't herself at the end. She was confused. What she wrote in that note, it wasn't the mother we knew. It's not fair to her memory to let this ugliness be her final word. Let's just do the right thing, the three of us. We'll tear up the will and split everything evenly, the way she really would have wanted." Her betrayal was insidious, trying to use our mother's memory as a weapon to invalidate her final, clearest wish. She wasn't grieving a mother. She was negotiating a deal. When I calmly told her I intended to honor Mom's will exactly as it was written, the sweetness in her voice curdled, and she hung up. An hour later, Kevin opted for a frontal assault. I heard the front door open. He still had his old key, and he stormed into the kitchen where I was making tea. He didn't look like a grieving son. He looked like a thwarted CEO. "Where do you get off?" he snarled. "You spent 5 years playing. Nurse, and you think that entitles you to everything? I have a family, a mortgage. Megan has a career. You have nothing. Mom felt sorry for you, and you used it to poison her against us." "Mom knew what she was doing, Kevin," I said, my voice quiet. "And I need you to give me your key." The demand stopped him cold. He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief that I would dare give him an order. "I've already called a lawyer," he threatened, his voice dropping to a low growl. "We are going to contest this. We will drag your name and Mom's through the mud. We will prove she was incompetent. Every penny you inherit will be spent on legal fees." That was the moment I saw it all with perfect clarity. There was no pain in their eyes, no sense of loss, only a bottomless reptilian greed. They weren't fighting for their mother's legacy. They were fighting for a bank account. They were treating her death like a hostile takeover. and I was the competition. My mother's will wasn't a punishment for them. It was a shield for me. It was her last act of caregiving, protecting me from the very people who should have been my family. And I knew then that simply inheriting the house wasn't enough. I had to truly own it, and that meant evicting the ghosts of obligation for good. The days that followed were a cold war fought over text messages and voicemails filled with empty legal threats. I had the locks changed, an act that felt both deeply necessary and tragically sad. I began the slow, painful process of sorting. Through my mother's life, closets full of clothes that still smelled like her, drawers of photographs, a lifetime of memories. I was trying to do it with the love and respect she deserved. The breaking point came on a Thursday. I had to go into town to meet with Mr. Gable and sign some probate documents. I was gone for less than 2 hours. When I pulled back into the driveway, my heart stopped. A moving truck was parked at the curb, its ramp extended to the back door, which was propped wide open. I ran inside. It was a scene of methodical violation. My brother and sister were there, directing 2 burly movers. Little green stickers were stuck to the grand piano, the dining room table, our father's favorite armchair. Megan was in my mother's bedroom, callously sorting through the jewelry box, dropping pieces into a velvet bag. Kevin was in the study, wrestling with the old mahogany desk. They weren't grieving, they were looting. "What are you doing?" My voice was a choked whisper. Megan didn't even look up. "The will is being contested," she said, her voice clipped and businesslike. "Our lawyer advised us to secure our sentimental assets before you have a chance to sell everything out from under us." Sentimental assets? I looked at the chaos, the utter disrespect. They were treating our mother's home like a storage unit. They'd won at auction. They'd dumped a box of photo albums onto the floor to use the box for something else. My mother's entire life tossed aside like trash. Something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The sadness, the years of quiet resentment, the lingering sense of familial duty, it all burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard steel. These were not my siblings. These were intruders. I took out my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. My voice was calm, but it was a calmness they had never heard before. "You have 60 seconds to get your people and yourselves out of my house," I said, my thumb hovering over the number 9. Kevin laughed. "Or what? You're going to cry? Or I'm going to call the police and report you for breaking and entering and theft." The laughter died in his throat. The movers froze. Megan finally looked up, her eyes wide with shock. They saw it in my face. The game was over. I was no longer their little sister, the pushover, the caregiver. I was the owner of the house they were standing in, and I was about to have them thrown out of it. The family they knew was officially dead, and I was the one who had just signed the death certificate. After they scurried away, leaving the house in a state of violated disarray, I didn't feel anger. I felt an incredible, liberating clarity. The final battle wouldn't be fought with lawyers or shouting matches. It would be an execution. My execution, on my terms. A week later, I sent them each a formal, identical email summoning them to the house for a final distribution of sentimental effects. I gave them a time and a date and made it clear that their attendance was their only and final opportunity to claim anything. When they arrived, the house was not the chaotic scene they had left. It was immaculate. I had them wait in the living room, where I had placed a single table. On it sat 3 items: the antique watch for Kevin, the diamond earrings for Megan, and a single thick photo album bound in worn leather. They looked at the meager display, then at me, their faces masks of contempt. "This is a joke, right?" Kevin scoffed. "Where's the rest of it?" "This is not a negotiation," I said, my voice calm and low. "This is a closing statement." I looked at them, truly looked at them, not as my siblings, but as the strangers they had become. Mom's will gave me the property, but her final words gave me the truth. She said family is about showing up. I held on to a sliver of hope you might understand that. Instead, you threatened, manipulated, and then you broke into her home and treated her memory like a clearance sale. You proved her right in the most spectacular way possible. I picked up the photo album. You want your inheritance? Here it is. I slid it across the table toward them. You can have the memories. You can have the pictures of the smiling family you let die. You can have the past you were never truly present for. Because I am keeping the future. Megan started to speak, a protest forming on her lips, but I cut her off. This is the last time you will ever set foot in this house. This is the last time we will ever speak. My lawyer has already served you with a no-contact order. If you come near me or this property, again, you will be arrested for trespassing. The shock on their faces was more satisfying than any amount of money. They were finally, completely, powerless. Take your things, I said, my voice a whisper that filled the entire room, and get out of my life. They took the watch, the earrings, and the heavy album of their own failure and walked out the door for the last time. I closed it behind them, and for the first time, the silence of the house felt like peace. That final confrontation was a year ago. I haven't heard from Kevin or Megan since, and the court-ordered silence is the greatest gift I've ever received. I heard through a cousin that their legal challenge to the will was dismissed, costing them a small fortune and gaining them nothing but the public embarrassment of having their own mother's final words read into a court record. They are, for the first time in their lives, facing the consequences of their own choices, and I feel nothing about it but a distant, quiet peace. My life is unrecognizable. I went back to my graphic design work, but now I do it from a sunlit studio I set up in what used to be a spare bedroom. The house itself has been transformed. Where there was once the smell of antiseptic and sickness, there is now the smell of baking bread and fresh paint. Last weekend, I hosted a barbecue in the backyard for my chosen family, the friends who checked in on me during the darkest years, the neighbors who brought over meals without ever being asked, the people who saw me when my own blood relatives wouldn't. Watching them laugh under the shade of the old oak tree, I realized my mother's true inheritance wasn't the money or the property. It was my freedom. She released me from the obligation of a family that only knew how to take. She knew that real family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. It's about who shows up. It's about who holds your hand, not because they have to, but because they want to. For every person out there who is quietly caring for someone, for every son or daughter who has become invisible in their own home, please know that what you do matters. Your sacrifice is seen. Tell us about the people who show up for you in the comments below. Let's celebrate the families we build, not just the ones we are born into. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe for more stories about finding your true inheritance.